Into Ask Dawgs Central on a Friday evening before the 4th of July. Hope you guys are doing well. My name is Graham Coffee. I am alone today, minus my usual co-host. Holiday weekend, folks are out traveling. I just got back from a road trip myself, so a little hard coordinating schedules this week, but we wanted to make sure we gave you guys at least a short show on this Friday evening, something for you guys to consume over the holiday weekend if you're hitting the road or getting out in different places. So obviously, the big news of the day, well, or of the week, of the off season, I guess you could also say,
out in different
is
places.
the USC UCLA to the Pac-12 news. I'm sorry, to the Big Ten news. Sorry, it's a little bit difficult. Not used to producing and talking at once, so bear with me this evening. Yeah, think it caught everyone off guard. What this feels like to me is kind of the big match that's going to strike the powder keg. Last year, we saw the news come out of Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC. Takes the league to 16 teams, obviously kind of threw the Big 12 into flux, but that still made geographic sense, right? Like it was a natural expansion for a conference that was already in the state of Texas, has natural rivals for Texas and Oklahoma with Arkansas from the old Southwest Conference days. You had Missouri from the old Big 12 days. Texas A&M and Texas obviously are arch rivals, so it all felt natural, right? This move yesterday with USC and UCLA heading to the Big Ten is a little bit different. Like you're talking about two schools that are probably a couple thousand miles, 1,500 miles away from the closest competition in the conference. The Big Ten's basically skipping over the mountain time zone and landing itself in Southern California. There's a huge travel situation there. Culturally, USC and UCLA are extremely different from schools like Iowa, right? USC, UCLA, flashy, warm, sun, Southern California. Then you have kind of the traditional Big Ten ethos, which is, kegs and eggs for an 11 a.m. kickoff time and cold and snow and kind of the whole like Midwestern mentality. So really fascinating from a lot of standpoints, but I think this is kind of the final blow to college football remaining how we knew it, right? Like I think that moving forward, you are 100% heading towards a new world of college athletics, at least when it comes to college football and college basketball. Obviously, the SEC is in great position to kind of continue expanding, become a super league, as they call it. The Big Ten, even though this move really, just doesn't even, bring them up to a number higher than the SEC has because of the geography, this feels like the kind of throwing down of the gauntlet and saying like, all right, it's a race. The race is on, and now we're going to see which of these conferences can really acquire teams fast enough. And in my opinion, the Big Ten is a bit of an advantage over the SEC because the teams that they're going to want to acquire, like Washington and Oregon potentially, or a Stanford or a Cal, or even like a Utah maybe, or someone in the Mountain Time zone like that. Like those schools currently sit in conferences that are on shaky ground, and the Big 12 just added UCF and Cincinnati and all these schools, but at the same time, they still don't have a a rights package that's been finalized and in place. So no one is really under any contractual obligation right now to stay there. And so all of this could change dramatically. It would not shock me if we see some of these teams that are in the Big 12 currently leave potentially for another conference before the league ever really plays a season in the form that we're expecting it to be in that 2025 season after Oklahoma and Texas leave, or when Cincinnati and the other new additions show up. So it's a fascinating time. It's definitely not your grandfather's college football, right? I think we're looking at a sport that is in a little bit of an identity crisis because college football has always been built on regionalism. That's where the SEC chant came from, right? Like, and I think for Southerners in particular, go back and read articles about Georgia going up and beating Michigan. I believe it was in 1960 or 1961 when Michigan was the one of the premier football institutions of the era and had all of the pageantry that Michigan likes to think it has now. There's quotes out there of people talking about it was like getting to refight the Civil War and win that time. And that's obviously not really politically correct today, but like there is still I think that element that exists within Southeastern football at this point in time of it's a point of pride for people in the region that feel like folks from up north and folks from other parts of the country have always kind of looked down at them. Population trends have changed dramatically over the last 2 to 3 decades. You have a ton of people that are in a mass exodus from big cities and from colder climates to places like Atlanta and Charlotte and large metropolitan areas in the South and the suburbs that surround them, because air conditioning and mosquito control basically made it so the South was livable. And a lot of the issues that used to exist don't want to go down that road too far. But point being, I think we're looking at a time here where that whole regionalism in college football is going to go away. The teams will still have their own personalities, right? Like, but just even with recruiting now, like when I was a kid, Ohio State had a bunch of guys from Pennsylvania and Ohio playing quarterback and, at the main skill positions. And they would go into Detroit and fight Michigan for big players. But now, CJ Stroud is a California native. Bryce Young at Alabama is a California native. It's a different time. And there was a point where the teams, they were made out of a bunch of guys that were from that state. And so the people that lived there and grew up there, they may have, watched their kids play high school football against those guys. And it just kind of perpetuated to where a school like Georgia, it represented the state of Georgia from a demographic sense, from a cultural sense. And, the beauty for UGA is its brand is in a national spot now where it can recruit kids from all over the country. Keely Ringo grew up in Washington State, went to high school in Arizona. There's plenty of guys that are on the team now that don't have kind of that Southern or Georgia upbringing, and that's fine. But it just changes the sport dramatically. And I mean, along with the change in kind of the regionalism, I think you're going to see. Well, I know you're going to see a lot of these traditional rivalries go away. Georgia and Auburn is a game that's probably already on the chopping block, depending on how the SEC decides to organize its new schedule. Stanford Cal, the big game, I mean, like that could be going away. All of the, like USC and Oregon has become a really intriguing series over the past 2 decades as Oregon kind of rose as a program, and USC with its history and through the Leinart Bush era and kind of those glory years that they had as a dynasty in the early to mid 2000s tried to hang on to its stranglehold in the Pac-12. So the flip side of this is money rules everything. If you want to know what happened here, you can basically trace it back to Larry Scott, the former commissioner of the Pac-12, and all of the dumb things that he did, particularly around carrier rights of the Pac-12 network when it launched. And I live in the Four Corners region over in Southwest Colorado, and I've had a couple different cable providers over the years, depending on which house we were in and what was available and all of that. But I got to pay a lot extra if I want the Pac-12 networks, a few years ago when Washington State was in the middle of its, great season with Gardner Minshew before Mike Leach left, probably a third of their games, 4 or 5 of them were on, they were 2:30 p.m. Pacific time kick or central, like just weird kickoff times and hard to find. And so I get why UCLA and USC want to go and tee it up in the Big Ten because it helps their national brands, and the money in the Big Ten right now, at least from a TV rights standpoint, is even bigger than what the SEC can offer. There's also the difference that ESPN owns the SEC network and they pay out schools in the SEC, but the Big Ten owns a portion of its own television network. And so with that, you have a situation where the ceiling maybe is a little bit higher in the long run in terms of what the actual earning potential is for these schools. And all of that money makes it a lot easier to charter private jets and send your football teams and your basketball teams over the entire Pacific and Mountain time zones to go play games in the middle of the country or as far away as Rutgers and Maryland, all the way over on the East Coast. So it's a strange time. The natural question is kind of, how does this affect Georgia? Obviously, it's not really changing anything in the immediate, but it does, I think, lead to, there are going to be a lot of folks coming to the SEC. Like Georgia, I think, will hold on to being the only SEC member in the state. I don't think Georgia Tech is really considered to be a prime candidate by anyone for SEC membership. They were there, they left. It was a really dumb move, all over basically a feud between Bobby Dodd and Bear Bryant. It's worth reading about if you haven't. But who does the SEC target, right? Clemson and Florida State have always been the two most natural fits. They're the two programs that really run like a like SEC football teams, right? Like football is first, and no one's trying to like make any kind of overly pious or virtue signaling type moves or statements or create false perceptions that football doesn't run things, because football does run things in those places. So I think those two are a natural bump to 18 if you're the Southeastern Conference. But I also think that you're in a place where what happens with like UNC academically, maybe more of a fit for the Big Ten, but Georgia and North Carolina, I mean, they have a series that goes way back. You talk to old time UGA folks or, folks that grew up in Athens, and they'll tell you about like their parents going to Chapel Hill every year for games, or every other year for games back in the day, and how much they enjoyed the trip. And Chapel Hill and Athens are two of the best college towns in America. They are the two oldest state universities in the country. There's a lot of kids from Atlanta that go to North Carolina. There's a lot of kids from North Carolina that go to Georgia. I'm one of them. There is a lot of UGA alums in North Carolina now in the Charlotte area. So I think that would be a huge coup for the SEC if they could pull it off. But North Carolina is an institution that considers itself, a Southern Ivy kind of place, and they want to hold up a certain perception. And by joining a conference with, academic schools like Alabama or Auburn or LSU, or some of the, schools that are maybe not as prestigious, does that sully their reputation? I don't know. The other counter argument is all of that money that you're going to make from being an SEC would allow you to build even more buildings on campus. But I think North Carolina would definitely be on the wish list for the SEC. It's just, can they get them? The other side of this. So, yeah, I mean, Georgia and North Carolina have played 31 times. The last one was obviously Kirby Smart's first game back in 2016. But before that, I mean, in the 50s and 60s and 40s, they were playing almost every other year, and in some instances 4 years straight. So I think Georgia folks and UNC folks would be very pumped to have that game back on the schedule. The other thing that's kind of worth considering is just the ACC grant of rights, right? Right now it runs through 2036. And so it's seen as a terrible deal because the value of these television contracts are skyrocketing and skyrocketing and skyrocketing. And so by locking in a deal for, I think it was 18 years when the ACC signed it, maybe 20. It was a long ass time. I know that. The ACC really negotiated themselves out of a boatload of money that they could have made if they were signing 4-year rights packages with ESPN or whoever wants to carry their games. But maybe that's the thing that saves the league now, because the way that that's written is really strict. The ACC, they stole a bunch of teams from the Big East, and so they knew better than anyone. Kind of, you could argue the ACC sort of kicked this realignment thing off once upon a time. They know better than anyone just kind of how fickle this whole thing goes. So I could see, like, even if a school wanted to leave the ACC, I'm pretty sure the way it's written is their television rights go, the revenue from their television rights will continue to go to the conference until 2036, which is an absolute eternity. So it's a little, the move that the Big Ten made, I think, is almost, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a problem for the SEC, because they're already at 16 teams, and Texas and Oklahoma are just two enormous brands in college sports. But if the Big Ten decides to go and add Oregon and Washington, or, Stanford and Cal, or, some of these other teams out there, you could see a scenario where they get to 24 teams or 22 teams or 20 teams pretty quickly. So it's something worth keeping an eye on. I think for the SEC, everyone talks about the ACC schools because it is a natural fit geographically. But at this point, you got a Midwestern conference that's in every time zone. So there's nothing to stop the SEC and Greg Sankey from saying, okay, we're already in the state of Texas, let's go scoop up a Baylor, or, let's go scoop up an Arizona or an Arizona State. It would be weird. I mean, like, personally, just my own bias and my own lifestyle, I would love to see, Georgia have games on the schedule in Boulder, Colorado, or Tempe, Arizona every few years. There's few places nicer than Boulder, Colorado in September, or Tempe, Arizona in November. But it's going to be a bizarre time. And I think for someone like me who came by college football and my passion for it through generations of family members who attended the same school at UGA and who, talked about old games like Georgia Auburn 1982 and, talked about kind of some of these regional rivalries and are really rooted in the regionalism of the sport. This is starting to get really weird. Even when I go home to North Carolina to see family, there's always been that clear divide of Georgia and South Carolina are, SEC territory. I guess South Carolina is kind of a split state with Clemson being an ACC school. But once you cross into North Carolina, you're in ACC country, and it's the Tobacco Road schools and all of that. And I think it's a interesting dynamic because old men at church on Sunday mornings, they always like to barb each other back and forth about what each conference is doing and how they appear on the national stage, or how they did in bowl games where the conferences went head to head. And I think you're heading for a time maybe where a league like the SEC has basically two 12-team divisions, and that whole conversation about the SEC having its own playoff doesn't sound so silly now, does it? Right? Like if you've got a 24-team league, you can run a pretty damn entertaining 4-team or 8-team playoff at the end of the season with just SEC schools. If you're adding, Clemson, Miami, FSU, UNC, I think Virginia Tech would be a great cultural fit in the SEC. Likewise with Louisville, I think Kentucky would crawl over broken glass to keep Louisville from ever having a chance in the conference, to be in the conference. But regardless of that, like that all makes sense regionally, but there's nothing to stop the SEC from, if you want a brand and you want a school that's trying to operate and trying to invest money in its college football program the way that SEC schools, aside from Vanderbilt, are, known for doing, and the way that they operate, I think you're looking at why not Oregon, right? And Washington is a great brand as well. Would it be weird? Absolutely. But if you acquired other schools in the region, if you brought in a Colorado and a Utah and kind of bridged that in between gap between Texas and the Pacific Northwest, those schools could do a lot in a pod system and cut down on travel and all of that. But like we said before, there's too much money being thrown around for travel to be a consideration at this point, which means everyone that told you for years and years, remember that the NCAA has made tons of decisions over the years, and leagues and athletic administrators have made tons of decisions over the years under the company line of we want to do what's best for our student athletes, right? Not anymore. Not now. Not that the whole thing is switched the other way, and now that the money's in the other direction, it doesn't matter. So it's going to be interesting. Harry Liggy says that Georgia Tech is on hospice watch. That is true. If the ACC was to dissolve, I don't know where they land. It's been a long time since they've been good, and it'll be interesting. So, yeah. Any other talk about the realignment stuff at this point, I think would just be speculation, but it really is a fascinating time. And I guess the closing thought I will give here is just don't count anything out at this point, because I never thought we would see the day where, the two of the kind of heritage Pac-12 brands. The Pac-12's history goes back long, long time. never thought we'd see a time where those two brands were moving over into a Midwestern-based conference. And so if the Big Ten is going to do it, then I can promise you the SEC is going to do it as well. It's an arms race at this point. FYI, if you are not aware, we are live on our YouTube channel. I can see any questions that you guys throw up there or comments. So we'd love to have you stop by over there. I'm going to throw that link up on Twitter right now. Boom. So if you guys want to jump in, that would be a blast. Let's talk a little bit. So we've got some questions from our Dawgs Central subscribers. If you're not on Dawgs Central, don't know what you're waiting for. It's an awesome community. Super grateful for the way you guys have supported it so far. We just hit our 30-day mark and 150,000 page views in the month of June. Just really, really exciting. We're thrilled with the response and the participation from you guys, especially considering this is really kind of the slow season for college football. We've got a lot of cool stuff coming. We're about to ramp up big time with preview content and lots of videos, lots of subscriber only content and preview content. And really hope you guys will join us over there. If you haven't checked it out, go to dawgcentral.com/register. We are still running our 6 months for $33.18 deal. That will probably end here very, very soon. But if you go over today, you can get basically from now through football season for $33.18. It's a pretty good deal. So got a question here. We're going to shift to recruiting a little bit. We got one from the chat. It says, thank you, Harry is a proud member. I didn't mean to put his up, but good advertisement nonetheless. S. Rhino, do we expect UGA to try and flip a 2023 quarterback or go all in on a 5-star 2024 quarterback? So if you haven't checked it out, I interviewed 2024 5-star quarterback Julian Sayin this week. Fun write-up that I got to do with him, and also broke down some of his highlight tape. So that's the guy that we're hearing the most buzz about right now on the quarterback front. He told me he was originally planning on committing in October of this coming fall. Now he's looking at bumping that commitment up a little bit. What does up a little bit mean? I don't know. He is not a guy that I don't know. He's not your average recruit in this day and age. I don't. He's told me that he does not expect to put out a top 10 list or a top 5 list. I think he's the type of dude that he's going to decide one day where he wants to go, and he's going to go. So I think Georgia's in a very good position for him. I do know that I think, one of our competing outlets has started kind of putting some forecasting about him towards Alabama, maybe. But I'm not saying this just to appeal to my audience. I would say this to anyone on any show. Julian Sayin is a better quarterback prospect than Arch Manning. Arch Manning, because of the name, because of the legacy, because if you look at the track record of football players who are children or bloodline of past NFL players who are successful, they have a great percentage, a great hit rate of becoming NFL players themselves. I understand why Arch Manning is highly rated, and because of just what his name brings as a brand and in free publicity to a school, and because of the skill position recruits that are going to follow him. I get why he was the number one quarterback in the 2023 class. If we're going just off tape, there's better ones in this class that from what they've done so far, from what we have to go off of. Nico Iamaleava, a 6'7" freak athlete. He's going to Tennessee, but like his tape and his accomplishments on field and what he has done statistically, much more impressive. Brings me to Julian Sayin. He's started 1 year of high school football in a pretty tough division in California. He's got the arm. He has incredible footwork. What's most impressive for me about him, though, it's not the physical tools. He has plenty of physical gifts, but what he can do on the field from a football IQ, field awareness standpoint is extremely rare for a guy who really, just stepped into the starting role less than 12 months ago. His field awareness is freaky. He has field awareness that there's a lot of college quarterbacks that would be jealous of what he can do and what he sees. He's a guy that, he has running ability, but you just don't see him run on tape that much because he's really damn good at keeping his eyes downfield, and he'll avoid the rush and he'll move laterally and, not cross the line of scrimmage and find a guy loose, or he'll scramble right and throw back to a guy that's open on the left because the defense has influenced his way over. He does all the little things really, really well. His play fakes and his play action, just kind of how he carries out fake tosses and fake handoffs and all of that, it is extremely detailed, and he does all of the little things that you need to do as a college quarterback once you start playing against guys that share your athletic gifts. And normally a guy with his physical talent, they just out athlete everyone on the field around them all through high school. And then they get to college and they hit this really steep learning curve of what do I have to do to really excel and play well at this level. Julian Sayin is already doing those things. He is as college ready of a young quarterback as I have seen. What I think really makes him that way is his decision making is just well beyond his years. 34 touchdowns and 5 interceptions this season. You're talking about over 10 yards attempt, but the number that really stands out to me, 71.5% completion percentage from a high school quarterback. That's freaky. And I mean, his tape is actually a little bit, there's a little bit of like Bryce Young similarities there, truthfully. So if Georgia can land him, they need to land him. And they're, all in, I think, on trying to secure his commitment. I believe he will commit probably sometime this summer. If not, maybe sometime early September. But just the vibe I'm getting is sometimes this summer. And I think Georgia, if they can land him, the future of the program is probably in better hands than it would be had they landed Arch Manning. 2024 is still a question mark. As good as I think he is, as ready as I think he is, it's still tough to step on campus and start as a true freshman. I do know he plans to early enroll wherever he goes. So I think in that regard, he would, he would have a little bit extra time. He would have a spring to try and get. He does play in a pro style offense already, and he goes under center a lot. And that's something that we just don't see in high school football anymore. And so I think those things will help him. And just you watch him on tape, he gets through his progressions quick. And so if UGA can bring him in, I think they're in great shape, because I do think Carson Beck has risen his game in a pretty significant way. And I think that, he's in a position where he could be the quarterback and Georgia would be in good hands in 2023. So I'm not so worried about who the guy is for next year. But I think if you're Georgia, you have a lot of unknowns for 2024, just because Vandegrift and Stockton that light hasn't come on yet. Not to say it won't, but it hasn't happened yet. Moving on, William Griffin asked at running back 3, do you expect Dejan to break out this year? I do. I love Dejan Edwards. I don't know, folks kind of, I think, not made fun of me, but just, it was sort of an inside joke on Dawgs Sports Live last year on Josh and I's film review shows, because we would always show his tape, and when he would get in the game, it's just like, it's impressive. He has really, really good vision. He does a great job of getting to the line of scrimmage and making a cut and going. And he bounces in and he gets through the hole. His yards after contact, his yards before contact, like, he does all the things right that you would want him to do. And a lot of times he's often playing behind second team offensive line that sometimes is still blocking the opposition's first team defensive line. So it's not like he's like always coming out on the field and just has these giant holes that you could drive a Mack truck through, and he's just getting easy yards. So I do think that I've heard lots of great things about his spring practice. I know the coaches love him. I know he does everything right from all accounts. So yeah, I think he's definitely the number 3 running back coming into the season. McIntosh and Milton are the clear kind of 1A and 1B, but both those guys have some injury history, right? And they are both different kind of backs than he is. Dejan is, bigger than McIntosh, smaller than Milton, doesn't have quite the agility and like ability to do crazy things in the pass game like McIntosh does, but he does have, I think, a little more of that maybe than Milton does when you're talking about some of those like quick routes. We did see Milton, he did a great job catching a touchdown on a wheel route out on G-Day. He had some nice screen passes his freshman year at Georgia, but just, I think there's a lot of things that Georgia can do with him that'll work out. So Ben in the chat asks, did anyone else hear the open mic where the guy said the players were getting paid by the people in those box seats at Texas? I think he means Texas A&M, but it does bring me to a question. We'll just talk about the whole state of Texas at once. That was left by one of our Dawgs Central readers on the forum. It says, how much is NIL having an effect on who we target? Are we moving on to the next target when it becomes obvious that NIL is factoring into their decision? Do you expect less battles with schools like Texas A&M? I'm sorry, Texas A&M. I'm sorry, Freudian slip there. So when you, yes, the short answer and the long answer is yes. If we're talking about NIL, there's some guys in this recruiting cycle that have been on campus a lot over the last year or 2 years, that I think a lot of outlets have talked about coming to Georgia for a long time. I know some of them went so far as to tell Georgia's staff that they were coming to Georgia at one point in time, but they're ultimately not coming to Georgia, or, things are just kind of, they just sort of cool off out of nowhere. And normally when that happens, what you're talking about is an NIL situation. Georgia is in a position where they can very legitimately talk to players and say, if you come here, there may be someone out there that's willing to give you, a bunch of money for the next 4 years. But if you come here, we'll develop you right, and you can make money for the next decade and a half in the NFL, and you can make a lot more of it. That being said, everyone has their own life choices to make, their own family situation. I'm never gonna dog a kid for taking money, right? Like, cash in while the opportunity's there. Life is short, injuries happen. We often don't know the family situations for some of these guys. There may be siblings that need to be taken care of. Whatever it is, it's their decision. It's their lives. It's their right to do whatever they want. But at the end of the day, take a kid like Sadir Mitchell, right? Was trending to Georgia for a long time. Everyone felt like he was coming, and all of a sudden, kind of at the 11th hour, it's Texas, right? And what I've been told is that there's been some NIL stuff that's happened there. I don't want to put out the misconception though that like Georgia has an NIL collective. There is a massive difference between inducement for play and marketing opportunities, true name, image, and likeness. I can tell you that Georgia is not out there, throwing big crazy numbers around to kids, basically saying, "We'll give you this if you come here." I'm sure that NIL is part of their recruiting because it's got to be part of everybody's recruiting these days. But it's not a situation where UGA is, how should I put it? Like, it's not that they're not playing the NIL game, but they're not. They're not. There's a clear difference between what Texas A&M is doing and what other schools are doing, or you're starting to see the schools this cycle who are doing something different than others. And all of that will come out in the wash. But the reality is, like, go look at the pro day times for all of the guys that went to Texas A&M or that were coming out of Texas A&M for the NFL draft last year. Like, they ran just kind of unbelievably bad times, right? Like, I'm talking tight end Jalen Weidemeyer, who was a projected first-round NFL draft pick in the preseason of last year. Go Google his name in mock draft. You will find him in first-round mock drafts. That dude's all of a sudden running a 5.09 40. Your running back is running a 4.8 40. Like, it wasn't good. And they didn't have a very good NFL draft because of it. Meanwhile, Georgia, you got guys that were rotation players who are going out in the combine and they're dropping 4.4s and they're testing out these crazy high athleticism scores, and they're getting 15 guys drafted. So there's going to be guys that take money and go to A&M and things don't work out and they transfer, or things don't work out with their career, and they will become cautionary tales. So the market always corrects itself. Right now, the market is in it's in the spot where there's a new thing happening and it's in flux, and we'll see where the actual proper spot is. What's the proper amount for, this Jaden Rashada kid, right? I don't know what he got. I don't think he got $9.5 million. His lawyer wants people to think he got that because it makes him look like he's damn good at his job, but it also makes him look like he's not protecting his client's interest. But longer conversation. Point being, with Rashada, like, he was at Elite 11 this week and he didn't look good. How would you feel if you just dropped millions of dollars on a quarterback that doesn't look good at a quarterback camp with no rush? I'd be worried, wouldn't you? So we'll see. I see Ben saying, I'm not talking about NIL. Yeah, I saw the video with the Texas A&M staffer pointing up in the stands saying, these guys pay a lot of money. I haven't heard anything about what the outcome or ripple effect of that will be, if anybody's going to get fired. But what I'll tell you is Jimbo looks dumb. Going up there acting like Nick Saban making comments about NIL was the most egregious and dishonest thing ever. And, jumping up there with like a persecution complex. And then all of a sudden there's always a smoking gun. Especially at a place like Texas A&M where this just happened overnight, where the switch just flipped and the faucet got turned on. There's plenty of schools in the SEC that have, bagman ecosystems that have been going on for years, and they hide their shit well. But like Texas A&M didn't try to hide it. They acted like they were trying to hide it, but if they were trying to hide it, we wouldn't all be talking about it. We wouldn't have all been talking about it on signing day last year and on early signing day last year and in October of last year. So long story short, Jimbo should have been smart enough to A, never schedule that press conference, but B, if he was going to go schedule a press conference and talk out, be in his feelings about what Nick Saban said, he definitely shouldn't have made any, like blanket statements about no laws or rules or anything like that being broken, because there's always a smoking gun. And it took like 6 weeks for that smoking gun to come out. Great job. Moving on. One other thing on the commitment front, on the recruiting front, I did, just since this does tie into Sadir Mitchell, it says, with Sadir Mitchell trending away, who do we target for his spot? So in this class, Jamal Jarrett has always been the number one defensive tackle target. Would Mitchell have been a nice piece for Georgia? Yes. Like, he's a big body that I think would do well, especially when Georgia wants to run 3-man fronts. He would be a great zero technique nose tackle. Doesn't have the pass rush ability or the kind of high end athleticism of, a Jamal Jarrett or of what Georgia's had at the defensive tackle position in the last few years, but could have been a great run stuffer in the SEC and a big body. And who knows what Scott Strickland would have developed him into over the course of his career. Maybe he does develop those pass rush moves, but Jamal Jarrett is a guy who is 300 plus pounds and moves much, much quicker. His 100-meter and 200-meter times are fast for anybody, and he's doing it at 300 pounds. What he does in terms of making plays outside of the tackle box, in terms of shucking guards and centers and running outside of the box and tackling running backs on the perimeter, or what he can do in terms of jumping into gaps and disrupting the backfield, or quarterback running back exchange, all of that stuff. Like, he's different. He probably should be a 5-star, and he probably will be a 5-star. He's just a guy that's never camped very much, and the guys that go to camps are always going to get preferential treatment normally, but he's a freak athlete. So Georgia's going to be fine. We expect him to sign with UGA. If you're a Dawgs Central subscriber, you've known that for a few weeks now. He's committing on July 19th, knock on wood, for UGA, that there's not another NIL situation at the 13th hour kind of deal. But I think that he's going to be really impressive. The other name to keep an eye on, a little bit different player, not a true zero tech or 3 tech defensive tackle, but Kelby Collins is a name that it's been given to me here just in the last 24 hours. He's out of Alabama. Really impressive prospect. He's highly rated by the services. Number 6 defensive lineman in the 24/7 Sports Composite, number 65 player in the country, but he's 6'5", 280. So he's got the length to be a pass rusher, but like, that's kind of the measurables of Travon Walker, right? Like, I think he would be kind of more of that, like, in Georgia plays a mint front on defense a lot, which basically means they have a true kind of outside linebacker / edge on one end, like a Nolan Smith or a Robert Beal. Then they have 2 defensive tackles squared up, like a Jordan Davis and a Devontae Wyatt. And then they have what they call a buck end. So Travon Walker was that buck end where he played that 4-eye technique. So he's not outside of the tackle box trying to pass rush around the edge. He would do that on certain situational downs, but I see Collins as that type of player where he can play that 4-eye position and really be that guy that what you got to have in the SEC, like you got to be able to stop the run, right? And he would be that big body with the long arms that can get blockers off of him and do that. And so, Kid Alabama, Georgia's obviously not the only program that wants him. He did visit June 24th. It's been a quieter recruitment. That's not a name that you've heard thrown around a lot, but I think he's a guy that UGA's staff has evaluated and has a very high opinion of. And as opposed to taking maybe another edge prospect in this class, I think that you may see him end up in this. And then, Georgia has Gabriel Harris in that edge class already. I think they really are hoping to and maybe expecting to land Samuel Mpimba and Quay Rousseau. So we'll see how it goes. But a little bit different strategy, I think, for Georgia on the defensive front. Instead of taking 3 true edge rushers, you're looking, or I'm sorry, taking 4 maybe. Or 2 true defensive tackles. You're looking at 3 edge guys, a true DT in Jarrett, and then that kind of hybrid buck end that has a big enough body to get in and play defensive tackle in certain situations, can pass rush, but is going to, really, really be tough against the run. So something to watch there. What else do we have here? Andy Adams asks, could you touch upon how much of a downgrade Searles will be versus Luke as OL coach? So we talked about this a little bit on the last show. When Searles was hired, the number that, sets off the flashing alarm in my head a little bit was just the number of sacks allowed by Georgia, or I'm sorry, by UNC in his 3-year tenure there. Particularly last year was a abject nightmare for North Carolina. I mean, they were a preseason top 10, top 12 program. Week 1 at Virginia Tech, Sam Howell gets sacked like 7 times and he's pressured all night. Howell was a really athletic quarterback. He ran for hundreds and hundreds, almost 1,000 yards last year. So a guy like that getting sacked 7 times, he's just literally getting bared down upon on every single play. Going back and looking at things a little bit, there's a couple things that I will say. One, that offensive line was really, really poor, like in terms of experience last year. It wasn't a well-recruited offensive line. There's just not that many schools that can recruit elite offensive linemen. Georgia just won a national title. Is Searles going to recruit on the level of Sam Pittman? No, but like almost nobody has ever recruited offensive line position on the level of Sam Pittman during his time at Georgia in the history of college football. Like, he was putting together just stupid, historically incredible classes. I think that Searles will be a much better fit than Luke was with what Todd Monken wants to do. I think philosophically, those two guys agree on how an offensive line should function, how a run game should function. I think they're going to sync up really well. Monken likes to run more mobile offensive linemen. He wants to see more pulls, more power type schemes where you're pulling offensive linemen from one side of the formation and trying to create a numbers advantage in the box and spring a big run. Matt Luke's blocking scheme was much more zone blocking. Well, Sam Pittman's blocking scheme when he was with Chaney and Coley was much more zone blocking schemes, man blocking schemes, where it was just everybody big and get the guy in front of you, and the running back just reads the line and picks a hole, right? I think for as much talent as Georgia had on the offensive line, there were times where they underperformed in run blocking. Last year, Georgia lost Tate Ratledge first series of the season, so I don't want to I want to be fair to Matt Luke, but I also felt like it was very clear all season long. Josh and I talked about it week after week. You could look at it on film. You could look at what holes on offense Georgia was averaging yards per carry on. You could look at everything and you could tell that Georgia had a issue with guard play. And, there was times where Justin Schaefer struggled, but it was particularly Warren Erickson. I don't know if he was injured more than we knew last year or what, but there was just so much inconsistency in the center of that line. Van Pran, first-year starter, redshirt freshman center, ended up being the most consistent of all those guys. But I just felt like Georgia had a problem all year. I'm not a football coach, but it's like if I can figure out you guys have a problem, then you guys can figure out you have a problem, right? And it felt like nothing was ever done to take care of that problem until second quarter of the national championship game when you're getting your ass whipped up front and Warren Erickson's getting pushed around and your quarterback's getting harassed and nobody has time and your run game's not working and everything's blowing up in your face. And finally you do what you should have done 2.5, 3 months earlier, and you make a switch at right guard. And that switch ended up being bringing in Jamari Sawyer and putting Broderick Jones at left tackle. But, like, go back to watch the Tennessee game after Warren Erickson went out with the flu bug. Like, Truss had a couple kind of, like, freshman mistakes or, first-timer mistakes on the first couple of series he was in the games where he just missed a call on a protection or, something happened communication-wise. But, like, the second half of that game, he is mauling folks, and Georgia was opening up big holes at right guard. And really, once Sawyer came in at right guard in the national championship game, Georgia dominated the line of scrimmage from that point on. That James Cook run came off of right guard. There was a lot. The first series of the second half, Georgia was doing good things on the offensive line, and just for some reason went away from the run game when it was working well. But I say all that to say this: I don't think that Matt Luke was as good as maybe everyone thinks that he was in hindsight when comparing the job that they should expect Cyril's to do. Go look at Matt Luke's recruiting for Georgia, and it wasn't bad by any means, but, like, we're not talking about Georgia of the Mark Richt era. We're talking about modern UGA football, like, coming off of the recruiting run that Sam Pittman had just had. You should be bringing in guys that, don't maybe, like, fall under the umbrella of developmental prospects, at least not a class full of them. So I think that would be my thing. Like, he did what he needed to do. Matt Luke did what he needed to do to get Amarius Mims on campus, but he was also the reason why Amarius Mims wanted to leave at one point. So it's just, I don't know. It's tough. I do think Ernest Green is going to go down as one of the best inside O lineman that Georgia, or he may end up playing tackle, but it's like that dude's going to be a stud. He has incredible hands. But across the board, I think if you look at the guys that Luke brought in, he gets credit for Van Pran and Mims and Broderick Jones and Tate Ratledge and a lot of those guys, but, like, a lot of those relationships were built by Sam Pittman, and he took over kind of there at the end of that recruiting cycle. So time will tell. But I think Stacy Cyril's the early returns are just that the team likes him and things are going well. And I think, Georgia's doing a decent job on the recruiting trail at offensive line with some of the hauls that, like, just kind of the way things line up right now. It's hard to stack really deep and good offensive line classes year after year because, like every position now, these kids want to play. So we'll see. I think, though, that the product on the field and just mentally, I think we may see an improvement over what we saw from Georgia's offensive line last year, particularly in the interior, just because there was so many downs where there was miscommunications. I mean, Georgia got dominated up front in the middle of the line by Missouri last year. Missouri was a bad football team, but they pushed Georgia around at right guard and left guard and made things very hard. And that's Stetson Bennett had a big day statistically in that game because Georgia couldn't run the ball early in that game and really, didn't run the ball well until the backups came in for both teams. So let's see if there's any other questions here. Doesn't look like it at this time. Yeah, if you guys don't have anything else, I think we're going to wrap it up. We're right at an hour. One thing I did want to share, obviously I'm going to plug dawgcentral.com one more time. Please get over there and check it out. It's not just me. It's a bunch of really talented creators. Jason Brazel is as plugged into UGA recruiting as anyone I've ever met or anyone that I know. John Smith, Josh Dog Stats, the My Gotta podcast guys, Trey and Lamar from 100 Sanford, Dustin with Field Street Forum. We've created a independent media collective, and we brought this team together very intentionally because our strengths and weaknesses balance each other out really well. And so we're gonna bring you guys a lot of broad-based content on a lot of different things. But yeah, this show, when we changed formats from Dog Sports to Dawgs Central, the podcast feed for Dog Sports is basically gone away. We're updating, new and improved, nice and shiny. And this show will go on the Dawgs Central podcast feed. It will be the first one. So I hope you guys will please like and subscribe to that. And if you're here in the chat hanging out or you're watching live on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, come on. What are you doing? Subscribe. We'll have fun. We do this a lot. Yeah, thank you guys for joining us. Looks like a good number of you watching this live, especially for a Friday before 4th of July. So hope everyone has a good holiday weekend and drives safe and travels well. I am Graham Coffee. We'll see you guys soon. You can find me on Twitter at DogOutWest.